Welcome to the Daily Dose. Today you can either watch on YouTube or listen as usual by downloading the audio file. And we're coming into the build-up for Christmas. Sometimes this month is called Advent. Perhaps you've got Advent calendars to start opening tomorrow, or you've been starting to light Advent candles at church. If you are a candle lighting sort of church. Some of you will have put your Christmas decorations up. We got ours up on Sunday. The tree is up. The lights are on. The tinsel is decorating the staircase. And we're looking forward in anticipation and excitement towards Christmas Day. Advent is about looking forward, about anticipation. And traditionally this has been the month where people are looking forward to celebrating Christ's first coming 2,000 years ago. But also with a kind of an eye on the future, looking back to Bethlehem, but also looking forward because Jesus has promised that he will return. And so throughout this month, I thought it would be helpful for us to do some different daily doses. On a Monday each week, we're going to be looking at the First Look course. It's an introduction to the life, teachings and miracles of Jesus. And that's a great thing to get others to watch and listen to with you. We'll be putting discussion questions up on Faith Roots so that you can participate, maybe as a family, maybe with friends in the office, particularly those that want to discover who Jesus is for the first time. And then the other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at some carols. Now, some carols are what we might call Christmas carols proper, the O Come All Ye Faithful and O Little Town of Bethlehem, and some more contemporary ones as well. But some are what we would refer to as Advent hymns or Advent carols. Carols and hymns that focus less on Bethlehem and more on that sense of anticipation, looking forward to Christ's coming. With, as I said, that particular focus on Jesus is coming back, that Jesus is returning. Recently we've been looking at John 14, where Jesus said to his disciples, don't be worried, don't be upset, don't be anxious. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would not have told you that I am going and that I'm coming back for you. Jesus has promised that he will not leave us on our own. He will return for us. Well, we're going to look at our first carol, our first Advent carol, and here are the words. You may recognize it. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to fight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here, until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. It's probably one of the oldest hymns or carols that we sing. And the words pick up on a theme that we find first of all in Isaiah chapter 7. If you've got a Bible to hand, or you can pull it up on Bible Gateway, you might want to look at it with me. But Isaiah chapter 7, And verse 10 says this: "The Lord sent this message to King Ahaz," he's one of the kings of Judah. "Ask the Lord your God for a sign of confirmation, Ahaz. Make it as difficult as you want, as high as heaven or as deep as the place of the dead." But the king refused. "No," he said, "I will not test the Lord like that." Then Isaiah said, "Listen well, you royal family of David. Isn't it enough to exhaust human patience? Must you exhaust the patience of my God as well? All right then, the Lord himself will give you a sign." The Lord himself will give you the sign. "Look, the virgin will conceive a child," or the young woman, the young girl will conceive a child. "She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. By the time this child is old enough to choose what is right and reject what is wrong, he will be eating yogurt and honey. For before the child is that old, the lands of the two kings you fear so much will both be deserted. Then the Lord will bring things on you, your nation and your family, unlike anything since Israel broke away from Judah. He will bring the king of Assyria upon you. Context. Here is the king of Judah. The kingdom of Israel has divided into two kingdoms: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And there's rivalry between the two kingdoms. And they're constantly trying to build alliances with other kingdoms. Syria to the north, forming alliances with Israel. Attempts to build alliances with places like Babylon or even with Egypt, really to sort of win that tussle, that competition with each other. Local, immediate enemies that they fear. And their response to the things that they fear around them is to look outside and to bring in outside help, but not to turn to God for help, rather to look to other humans and other powers. That might start to ring in our hearts, mightn't it? That's so often what we do, isn't it? That there are immediate problems, immediate dangers, immediate fears, and we look for help. But instead of looking to God for help, we listen to other people, or we put our trust in superstition, or we find something else that we think will, in effect, be our ally, our support. The problem is that Judah faces a greater danger still. There's a more immediate danger that you've seen in the Bible passage here, that there are enemies coming from the north, that the most immediate dangers are going to disappear quickly. Israel in the north will be deserted. It will be evacuated. Syria to the north of that as well, because the Assyrians are going to come down on them and destroy their cities and take their people into captivity. And then Judah will find that there's a greater enemy to fear. But Judah's biggest problem is their rebellion against God, for God is standing against them to judge them. And that's the context. We're about 700 years before Jesus. That's the context that the prophet Isaiah steps into. And God gives Isaiah the job of prophesying, of bringing this warning that God is bringing judgment. But throughout Isaiah's prophecy, as well as the warnings of coming judgment, there's this thread of hope that God will work to bring salvation. that the day is coming when a people taken into exile will return to their land, and cities laid waste will be rebuilt and restored. Destroyed and devoured farms will be replanted and become plentiful again. And that prophecy looks forward, anticipates a day not too far in the future when the people will return from exile under the Persian King Cyrus, but as its eye on a future date, looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus. That's the context. And here we have Isaiah. He's been prophesying about what's going to happen to King Ahaz. And he says, Ahaz, God says, you can have any sign you like, any demonstration, any miracle, any event that will point to the fact that God is acting, that God is speaking truthfully. And Ahaz in verse 12 refuses. He says, no, I'm not going with that. I'm not going to test the Lord like that. Now, on one level, that sounds super spiritual. We've been told you must not put the Lord your God to the test. Jesus responds to the devil when the devil comes and tempts him and says, no, we're not to test God. And so on one level, this looks very pious, doesn't it? Ahaz is saying, I'm not going to put God to the test. I'm not going to demand a sign. That sounds very good. Until you realise that when you look at the context, that the tone is not quite that sense of unconditional trust. Rather, it's more unconditional distrust, disbelief. If Ahaz was a devout, faithful God-fearer, then this would be incredible to say, I'm just going to trust God to do what he says. But here is this man that has not been listening to God, not been obeying God. Judgment is coming. And God is the one that offers the sign. And he's rejecting that. He's saying, I don't care. You can do what you like. You can turn up with any sign you like. I'm not interested. And that leads Isaiah to say, you are going to get not just a sign, but the sign that a young woman, young woman who's not yet married, will conceive and have a child. Now, you'll recognize from the wording there that in the immediate prophecy, Isaiah is simply referring to a young woman, that it doesn't specify that she is a virgin. That's possible within the meaning of the word. And certainly when the passage gets translated into Greek, the translators choose the word that specifically refers to a virgin. But at this stage, that's not sharply in view yet. That's going to come later. Well, not only will this young woman have a child, the idea is someone you don't expect to have a child is going to have a child. And possibly someone within the royal palace. The sense is this is going to shock. And then the child is going to be called Emmanuel. That name Emmanuel means God is with us. God is present. So this shocking, perhaps even disturbing event that is going to get them sitting up straight and paying attention is intended to say God is not absent. God is acting. And that is good news because God is the saving, covenant-keeping, loving God. But it's also, for Ahaz, bad news because it means that God in that context is present to judge. And it's going to happen soon. The sense here is that the child is going to be barely weaned before dramatic events will happen. that at first will look like good news as an enemy is dealt with, but actually is leading to something far worse as a threat comes upon them. And that's what happened. Assyria comes down from the north and wipes out the northern kingdom. And not long after this prophecy. It will be longer before Judah itself falls to Babylon. But the fall of Jerusalem, a little bit later, happens because a chain of events has been set into motion by what happens here and now. The crucial thing is this. The sign says that God is present. And the angel that appears to Joseph in Matthew chapter 1 therefore picks up on that prophecy. When he appears to Joseph in Matthew 1 verse 22, he, having promised that that Jesus is going to have that Joseph is going to have a son, Matthew rather picks up and says in verse 21 that the appearance of the angel, the promise of this child, this sign, is a fulfillment. All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet, through Isaiah. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. But Matthew says that the angel's prophecy is fulfilling what Isaiah said to Ahaz. That even as Isaiah was bringing that prophecy that had immediate impact for Ahaz and for Judah at that time, he had an eye on the future. That a greater child was coming, that this promise was going to be fulfilled in an even greater way, that there was a greater sign to come. Emmanuel, God is with us. And so here in Advent, looking forward to Christmas, we're looking forward to one of those markers in the year that remind us that God has made his presence with us in the person of Jesus. That Jesus came fully God, fully man. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then John goes on to say that the Word pitched his tent, made his house, came and dwelt amongst us. Jesus is God with us. And in him we see that God is present. Present at that time in the person of Jesus to save. Present with us now through the sending of the Holy Spirit, again with that work of salvation and sanctification. But the carol that we read at the start reminds us that there is further fulfillment to come. O come, Emmanuel, that we look forward to that day when Christ will return. God's presence with us, coming then to bring God's judgment. And the final day of salvation, because in the carol it picks up on the Old Testament prophecies, that sense of Israel being saved, Israel being rescued. But of course, through the Bible, what we've seen is that Israel becomes representative of God's plan to save a whole people, Jews and Gentiles, Israel and the nations, brought into one people for the praise of his name. He's got that idea of ransom. that Christ has ransomed, paid the price for us, the price for our sin, bought us for himself so that we belong to him. And it's got that sense of joy that we long for him to come, and we rejoice. Israel rejoices, but actually the new Israel, God's people, the people of God, you and I rejoice, knowing both that Christ has come for us and that he will come again for us too.